welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
It's an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at a Chili's in Texas. A woman is having lunch. Nothing about this moment should matter to anyone outside that restaurant, except she can't stop looking at the man sitting alone a few tables away. She doesn't know his name. She's never met him, but something about his face is nagging at her. And finally, she does something most people probably wouldn't. She pulls out her cell phone and sneakily under the table, she takes a picture. She's not sure why. She just has this feeling. A few days later, she turns on the news, and there he is again, except this time he's got a name. Ray Gricar, missing Pennsylvania district attorney, vanished without a trace. So she calls the police. Now, did this woman really spot a missing prosecutor eating lunch alone in East Texas 4 months after he disappeared over 1,300 miles away? The FBI is going to spend real time analyzing those photos to find out. But here's the thing about this case by this point. It's the summer of 2005, and this is just one sighting in a pile of sightings. We have Wilkes-Barre and Michigan, and now Texas. Everybody everywhere thinks they've seen him. And in just a few months, something's going to surface from the bottom of a Pennsylvania river that's going to make people stop asking, where is Ray Gricar? And start asking something much darker. What was Ray hiding? This is part 2 of the disappearance of Ray Gricar. Okay, so quick recap. At the end of part 1, we left off with fishermen finding Ray's laptop in the Susquehanna River in July of 2005, minus its hard drive.
Right. So you left us all on a cliffhanger, which was rude.
I did. I'm very sorry about that. Now, before we get to the hard drive, real quick, that Texas sighting that we just chatted about.
Yes. What was that about?
So this woman at a Chili's in East Texas takes this photo of a man on her cell phone. She really feels like he looks familiar, but she can't place him. And then a few days later, when she sees his face on the news, she calls it in. Belafonte police get the FBI involved to actually measure facial features in her photos against other photos of Ray.
And what's the verdict? Is this one, at least she got a picture and it's not just some vague explanation of someone in a suit.
Yeah, for sure.
Did they think it was him?
Well, it's inconclusive.
Of course it is.
Yeah. The nephew, Tony, actually gets a look at the photos himself, and he says something like, I've been able to clean the pictures up some, and I don't think it's him, but I do think there's a 1% chance the FBI could say it's a match. So it's just sitting there unresolved, like almost every other sighting in this case.
So 1%, but they're still checking. It's such a weird, honest way to put it. Like, we don't think so. 99% no, but we'll verify.
Yes, exactly. And by September, the family's getting visibly frustrated with how slow all of this is moving. Tony actually starts publicly pushing for police to focus specifically on how the laptop ended up in the river to begin with, saying, really, there's nothing else to go off of.
Yeah, so let's get to the hard drive because I'm sure we've all been waiting to find this out.
All right. That takes us another month in to October 26th, 2005. So this is about 3 months after the laptop had turned up. Someone's walking along the riverbank and they find it, the hard drive.
And it's just sitting there?
Yeah, it's like pressed into the mud where the water had receded. Real quick, before we go further, what does it actually mean to remove a hard drive? It's simpler than you'd probably think. In a laptop from that era, so 2004, 2005, the hard drive usually sits in its own little bay, most often on the bottom of the laptop behind a small removable panel. You don't need much to get in there. a small Phillips screwdriver in a lot of models. Some laptops from that era, though, didn't even need a screwdriver. They had a toolless latch that you could slide open by hand. Just pop the panel, slide the drive out, done. Genuinely a 2-minute job if you know what you're looking for. You don't need to be a computer expert. You don't need special equipment. Basically, anyone who knew the hard drive is the part that holds all the data could pull this off with a screwdriver they already had in a junk drawer. And that actually matters for how you weigh the suspects in this case. This doesn't require some criminal mastermind or a tech specialist. It just requires someone who understood one basic fact. If you want to make sure nobody can read what's on a computer, the piece you need to get rid of. Everything else, keyboard, screen, the shell, none of that matters if the drive itself is gone. Which is a scarier thought, honestly, than picturing some rare skill set involved. It just took someone who basically knew where to look. The hard drive is found about 100 yards away from where the laptop itself was recovered, which is far.
Yeah, that is far. And it's, probably not something that just came off on its own. Feels like they were separated on purpose, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what investigators think. If the hard drive had just come loose naturally, say from being tossed in the water, knocking around, you'd expect it somewhere close to the laptop, but 100 yards apart strongly suggests two separate actions. Someone removed the hard drive first, then disposed of the laptop, maybe somewhere else entirely.
So now that they have it, can they actually get anything off of it?
This is the frustrating part. It's sent to the FBI for analysis, and it's just too damaged. It had been in that riverbed for months. They can't recover a single usable file.
That is just awful. Finally find the thing that you've been, that might have all the answers that you've been looking for, waiting for, and it's ruined.
Yeah, right? Ray's nephew, Tony, said it was a needle in a haystack as far as we're concerned. And if it leads to another answer, fantastic. So far, everything that's come up in this case, though, leads nowhere.
Which is basically the theme of this whole case at this point.
It really is. So they work on that. Let's jump forward to April of 2006, which is the 1-year anniversary. And it's a strange moment because the town has visibly moved on in some ways. They have a new police chief. They have a redone courthouse. Ray's old office has a new occupant, a guy named Michael Madeira. But the case itself, frozen. Zero new information.
Which is such a weird thing, right? Like life just keeps going for everyone else around a mystery like this.
Yeah. And it's weird that things keep moving along, but the case really isn't. In May of 2006, there's a new detail that comes out, but not through police. It actually comes out through Dateline on NBC. They brought on one of the investigators that had been working this case since the beginning. He goes on the show and says out loud for the first time publicly that there was a report of Gricar being seen talking to a woman in Lewisburg on the very day he disappeared.
Oh, interesting. Do they know who she is or have any idea?
No idea. Never identified. And it raises this whole other question. If he was seen talking to someone right before he vanished, was that just a stranger at the antique mall? Or does this person know something and hasn't come forward?
And if they do know something, why didn't they come forward?
Exactly.
What's going on there?
Because it's not like you can live there and have no idea he disappeared.
Right. And it feels like that should have been a pretty big deal rather than reveal it on TV a year later.
Yeah, because that is the other side of it, right? Maybe they don't think anything you know is important because they've never put out that they're looking for you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Totally.
Right around the same time, the local paper runs a piece questioning whether investigators missed something early on. There's a report that the assistant TA saw Ray in Belafonte the afternoon he vanished, which isn't the town he was in, that's the town he lives in, and that the lead investigator hadn't gotten around to interviewing several people who were close to him in the earliest days of the case.
Wow. So we're a year in and there are already questions about whether the investigation itself dropped the ball.
Yeah, right.
For a pretty high profile missing person case.
Yeah, not a good look.
No.
This is where our next thread starts because not everyone agrees the investigation was handled well. If we fast forward to July of 2008, 3 years in now, there's a district attorney named Bob from a neighboring county, Montour County. He goes public and says flat out the investigation has been inadequate.
Ooh, that's a bold move. Publicly criticizing another DA's case.
Yeah, very bold, and it does not go over well. I want to give you a little bit more on Bob Buhner than what you would find just from a basic search, because when you dig deep, there's a lot more to him than just a DA from another county who got mad. First, Bob wasn't some outside critic with no connection to Ray. He was a personal friend, and he'd even spoken with Ray shortly before he disappeared. Bob's own account of that conversation is really sweet. Ray told him he couldn't wait to finally relax after 35 years on the job and that he had plans to visit his daughter, Lara, out in Washington. He was excited to get to go antiquing more often, obviously. And Bob said flatly, he never would have left them in the lurch. So when Bob goes public in 2008 saying the investigation's been inadequate, this isn't political theater, it's personal. And his criticism wasn't just vague handwriting either. He'd publicly pushed investigators to send Ray's damaged hard drive to a specific company called Kroll On Track, which at the time was based out of Minnesota. Interestingly, this is the same company that successfully recovered data from a hard drive pulled out of the wreckage of the Space Shuttle Columbia after it exploded on re-entry back in 2003. Now, Madeira pushed back on that, saying a third round of testing would cost thousands of dollars. They'd already spent money twice for this testing with nothing to show for it. And Bob's response was simple. They should leave no stone unturned. Now, they did eventually send it, but that company wasn't able to get anything back off it either. Bob had actually sent Madeira and the lead investigator a letter nearly 30 days before, detailing 3 potential leads that he felt were missed. When he didn't hear back at all, that's when he goes to the media instead.
Wow, and how does everyone react to this?
Well, 7 other Pennsylvania DAs hold their own press conference, basically to publicly defend Madeira and push back hard on Bob. One of them says, quote, Mr. Buhner, it pains me to say this, but you should be ashamed of your conduct.
Wow. Some DA on DA hostility there. It's not a small thing to say to a colleague.
It's not. Madeira himself responds by pointing out that Bob's never actually reviewed the case file. He's never met with investigators, never asked to look at any of the details that he's now publicly criticizing.
Wow. So is Bob just a guy with an opinion, or do you think he actually knows something the rest of us don't?
Honestly, it could be a little bit of both. And that question is about to become more important because Bob's name is going to come up in a much bigger way, tied to something we haven't even touched on yet.
Also, you kind of wonder too, he is a DA in a neighboring county. What has he been looking at? He probably has better insight than a lot of other outsiders looking in on this.
For sure. I bet he knows how procedures are supposed to go. They're both in the same job position, not that far apart. So he's definitely, I don't think, saying it for no reason at all.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so April 2009, now we're 4 years out since Ray vanished. And this is the moment the whole tone of this case shifts.
Yeah, what happened then?
A detective named Matthew Rickard, he's the lead investigator by this point, he reveals something to the press. He says that in the weeks before Ray disappeared, someone used his home computer to search terms like how to fry a hard drive and water damage to a notebook computer.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So someone searched how to destroy a hard drive before he went missing?
Yeah, before. This is search history that was done before April 15th.
Interesting. It's generally an interesting detail. I mean, that's not random curiosity. That's pretty specific.
Yeah. It gets a little stranger. It comes out that Ray had actually purchased hard drive cleaning software back in 2004, a full year before he vanished.
Interesting. So this wasn't even a one-time thing.
Mm-mm.
He owned software specifically for this?
Right. And this is where the case splits into two totally different readings. One version, Ray was planning something. People have suggested maybe destroying evidence, maybe planning his own disappearance, and this was a preparation. The other version, maybe this was just some pre existing privacy habit of his, something completely unrelated to what happened that April. And it's coincidence that looks a lot more sinister in hindsight than whatever it actually was.
Okay, but really, coincidence feels like a stretch when the timelines are so close there.
Agreed. I agree with you.
I mean, if the search was 3 years before and then he disappeared, that's totally different.
Yeah. Also, on the other side of this, there's a completely basic explanation floating around too. Around the time all of this came out, one source close to the case, reported as Jacobs in this newspaper article, pointed out that Ray had a county issued laptop. With his retirement just months away, he may have simply wanted to erase personal information before handing it back. Something as ordinary as his own credit card number or financial information. I mean, think about it. If you were retiring in a few months and knew you had to return a work laptop, would you want your personal banking information sitting on a device that's about to become someone else's problem?
Yeah.
If you look at it that way, that's not a criminal impulse. That's just basic housekeeping. Unfortunately, there's no way to know which read is correct. Protecting my credit card number, but also destroying evidence require the exact same search terms and the exact same software. That action looks identical from the outside, no matter which motive was behind it. Now, to be clear, even the detective who revealed this detail is careful about it. He says outright that this doesn't rule out foul play and that he's disclosing it partly to try to generate new leads, not because it definitively proves one theory. He also says, I want to generate some leads, not to dispel the homicide theory, but to put it out there that the information was found in hopes of keeping interest in the case renewed.
Interesting. So basically, even the police aren't sure what to make of it. And they're kind of using this as bait to get people talking again.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, the county DA, Bob, he's the one theory holdout. He says, quote, I still think he was murdered. The fact that they were looking for information on how to eliminate information from a hard drive or wipe it clean simply tells me there was important information on the hard drive and he didn't want other people to see it. That would give a motive to do him in. He adds, even if the information itself was deleted, Ray would still know what it was, which Bob argues makes him more of a liability, alive, than dead.
So his argument is basically someone else wanted that information gone. So they got rid of both the drive and Ray.
That is what his theory sounds like to me. Yeah. And it's around this exact same window in 2011 that this case is about to collide with one of the biggest scandals in American sports history.
Oh, is this the big scandal that you mentioned earlier?
Yes, it's Jerry Sandusky. So, November 2011, former Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky is arrested and charged on 40 counts of child sex abuse.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That is
pretty
crazy.
horrific.
Yeah. And how does this connect to Ray?
It's a way back connection. So, it comes out that back in 1998, years before he vanished, Ray personally investigated a complaint against Sandusky and decided not to press charges.
Okay, walk me through that. What actually happened in 1998?
So, a mother reports to police that her 11-year-old son had showered with Sandusky in a Penn State locker room. Her son had described some pretty uncomfortable physical contact and described in the report as Sandusky bear hugging the boy from behind and lathering him with soap before lifting him up to rinse under the shower head.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And this was in 1998. He wasn't charged till the end of 2011.
Oh,
So,
that puts a pit in my stomach.
yeah, agreed. Police do get involved. They actually monitored 2 phone calls between the mom and Sandusky. And on one of them, Sandusky says, I'm going to read this exactly. He says, I understand. I was wrong. I wish I could get forgiveness. I know I won't get it from you. I wish I were dead.
Sounds kind of like a confession.
Ambiguous, but yeah, some sort of confession. It's definitely not nothing.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets complicated. 2 different psychologists review the case. One of them, a woman named Alicia Chambers, writes that his behavior fits the pattern of a, quote, likely pedophile. The other psychologist, a man named John Seasock, looks at the exact same case and concludes that there's no evidence that anything was wrong, and he basically calls it horsing around.
Okay. So 2 professionals look at the same information and they came to completely opposite conclusions.
And I'm not exactly sure why they had psychologists look at it and not just police investigating this, but their reads were completely opposite. There's also a Department of Public Welfare investigator whose name is Jerry Lauro, who separately testifies that Sandusky admitted in an interview to hugging the boy while naked in the shower and knowing it was wrong.
Of course. Of course.
Of course. Of course it is. So Ray has to make a call based on a file that seemingly is internally split, a damning admission on one hand, dueling expert opinions on the other. He reviews everything and ultimately decides there isn't enough for a, quote, successful prosecution, meaning he doesn't think he can actually win this case in court, and closes it without even filing charges about a month after it started. So really quick.
Wow. So I have to ask the obvious question here. Is this like DA protects hometown football legend, or is it actually a legitimate legal call?
Well, everyone who knew him professionally pushes back hard on the protected him version. One of his former assistant DAs says flat out, that quote we said in episode 1, that no one got a bye with Ray. Ray's own nephew, Tony, actually spoke to this directly after Sandusky's arrest. He said, people ask why Ray didn't prosecute, and I have no problem saying because he clearly felt he didn't have a case for a successful prosecution. He also said Ray had a bitter taste in his mouth for the Penn State program and its coach, meaning if anything, Ray was personally skeptical of Sandusky. He just didn't think there was enough there to take it to court.
So he's saying it's not that he didn't believe the mom, it's that he didn't think he could prove it. Is that what his nephew was saying?
Yeah. And, we do see this in cases where they feel like they have everything they need and they take it. And then after the fact, they can't ever try that again.
Yeah.
So they hold off, hoping that they'll get more information. So I don't know. I understand what they're saying, but also there is that little nagging part to me where it's like he only looked at it for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what were police saying? What were investigators saying? Because you had the one welfare investigator who said that he thinks Sandusky did it and that he confessed to doing it. They had the taped phone call, but yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. The people who worked on the case disagreed with Ray's decision.
There was, yeah. He did have one assistant DA who said that back in 1998, she absolutely wanted to press charges. Also, there was a detective who originally investigated the case. His name was Ronald Schreffler. He later testified under oath during Sandusky's actual 2012 trial that he personally believed charges should have been filed back in 1998.
Yeah. So where does that leave us? Do we actually think Ray's disappearance is connected to Sandusky at all?
Here's the honest answer. There's no evidence connecting the two, none. It's purely proximity. The fact that Ray is missing and years later, a case that he once declined explodes into this national scandal. Definitely, that's all it takes for people's brains to draw a line between the disappearance and Sandusky. The facts don't actually support it, but also I would have been interested to hear what Ray had to say in 2012 or 2011 when Sandusky is arrested and taken to trial.
Yeah. And I bet that doesn't stop people from believing it anyway.
Right. It really doesn't. It actually leads to a real formal investigation. In 2013, Belafonte police get a tip that Ray was murdered and dumped in a mine shaft, specifically tied to the Sandusky case. So they bring the FBI in again to come check that out.
And I'm guessing nothing comes of that either.
Right. Nothing. Ray's nephew, Tony, is candid about this part of it too. He says basically that at this point, every claim that comes in, he takes with a grain of salt, just because there have been so many false leads that give the family hope that point to nothing.
Oh, so, okay. So Sandusky's basically a dead end evidence wise, even though it's the theory everyone latches onto.
Yeah, it's a weird connection, but that is the honest read. There's actually a second theory out there that gets way less attention than Sandusky. And when you dig into it, it's arguably more grounded in real evidence. And it involves something we haven't even talked about yet: a massive drug bust just 2 weeks before Ray disappeared.
Oh, is this something Ray was involved with? Was he prosecuting this?
Yes.
Oh, so why did you save this for now? It seems like a big deal.
Well, I wanted you to hear the Sandusky theory first, so you'd have something to compare it to. Let's go back in time slightly. March 31st, 2005. So now it's only 16 days before Ray vanishes.
Okay, 16 days. That's pretty close.
Yeah. Ray stands next to the Pennsylvania Attorney General at the time, a guy named Tom Corbett, who later becomes the state's governor. And together they announce what Tom calls, quote, the largest heroin operation that we've ever seen in our county.
So genuinely a big deal, not some small local bust.
Not small at all. State investigators have been building this case since 2003. The alleged ringleader is a guy named Taji Verbal Lee. So Lee is the last name. At the time, he's 24 years old from Newark, New Jersey. And this operation is allegedly tied to at least one fatal overdose, feeding a drug trade across the whole region.
And Ray's face is literally attached to this bust publicly.
Yeah, His photo is right there in the Attorney General's press release. And I was surprised when I started looking into this case altogether how much news coverage there was that he was commenting on or part of or had his picture on the front page, all prior to when he went missing. And this is one of those.
Where does this fit in with when that search was about clearing your hard drive? Was this before or after?
This was right in the same time frame. So he did buy that software about a year before, but the searches that they found on his computer were within like the 4 weeks before he disappeared, which is all they've said publicly. So I don't know if he was searching it multiple times or if it was one time 4 weeks before. But either way, he knew this was coming in that whole time frame, right?
Right. So he vanishes just 16 days after this whole thing goes down.
Yeah.
Suspicious timing.
For sure. And this was such a big deal that Ray's face and name are circulating online and in newspapers, specifically connected to taking down this major heroin operation. And, with the timing, here's where this connects to something even bigger. There's another prosecutor, a federal assistant U.S. attorney named Jonathan Luna, who's based in Baltimore.
Is he connected to Ray somehow? Do they know each other? Or did they know each other?
No direct connection that we know of, but let me actually give you more on Jonathan Luna because I think the details are important here. And actually, there's new information that came out just in the last few months. So, the night of December 3rd, 2003, at the time, Luna's a 38-year-old assistant U.S. attorney working out of Baltimore. He's married, the father of 2 young kids. He's in the middle of a big drug case, prosecuting a group tied to a record label called Stash House, which is allegedly a front for heroin trafficking. That night, he and the defense attorneys think they've hammered out a plea deal. The trial's recessed so they can finalize the paperwork overnight. Luna goes home for dinner, then heads back to the office. Around 9 p.m., he calls one of the defense attorneys and says he's finishing the agreement and will fax it over by midnight. He waits. That fax never comes. Using EasyPass records, which track you driving through tolls, and credit card activity, investigators later pieced together that Luna left the courthouse around 11:38 p.m. and drove north, away from his home in Elkridge, Maryland, deep into rural Pennsylvania, nearly 90 miles away. Early the next morning, December 4th, he's found face down in a shallow creek in Brecknock Township, which is Lancaster County, still dressed in his suit and tie from the office. He'd been stabbed 36 times, most of the wounds concentrated around his neck. Some federal investigators actually treated his death as a suicide or a staged suicide attempt gone wrong. His own penknife was believed to be the weapon, and it was found near his body months after he died.
Wow. That doesn't exactly scream accident there.
No, it sure doesn't.
So they think he actually stabbed himself 36 times?
Yeah. Investigators also found no wallet and no cell phone on his body, only a small amount of cash. His car was found nearby with bloodstains inside and out. Now, despite all of those stab wounds, the actual cause of death was drowning. He was still alive when he went into that creek. For years, this case sat in this maddening limbo. Anonymous federal law enforcement sources leaked information suggesting the wounds were mostly shallow and non-fatal, floating the idea that this might have been a suicide or some kind of accident during a breakdown. To this day, over 2 decades later, no suspect has ever been identified or charged. No official cause of death was made public. But And this is just breaking as I started gathering research for this case. In late 2025, more than 20 years later, a Pennsylvania judge finally unseals Luna's autopsy report after a long legal fight from a local news outlet. And it confirms officially for the first time this was a homicide. Freshwater drowning combined with multiple stab wounds to the neck. The examiner even noted the wounds were consistent with a knife, a can opener, a tool, or even fingernail marks, suggesting this brutal, close personal attack.
Wow.
So, bringing this back, when people in 2005 started asking whether Ray's disappearance might connect to Luna's death, two prosecutors, both entangled in heroin cases within about a year and a half of each other, they were looking at a case that even 20 years later still doesn't have an answer. And now that we know Luna's death is officially confirmed a homicide, not a suicide, not an accident, that parallel arguably deserves even more weight than it got in 2005 when officials were still hedging on what actually happened to him. That's part of what makes the case so controversial, and we might have to cover it because it's its own version of wild. But a lot of people obviously find that theory hard to believe, which is why it draws so much scrutiny.
Yeah. And so now we have two prosecutors, both involved in heroin cases. One turns up dead in a creek, stabbed dozens of times, and the other one just vanishes off the face of the earth.
Yeah, the parallel there is wild. And if you
Yeah.
think about it, maybe they learned something from the first one if they are indeed connected. Also, this isn't some random internet forum theory. You have two sitting district attorneys, both from Pennsylvania, Ted McKnight and our friend Bob from earlier. They both go on record asking the Attorney General's office to take over the Gricar investigation, specifically citing concern about prosecutors dying or disappearing under suspicious circumstances. McKnight says, directly quoted, "I'm a believer that foul play happened to Ray Gricar."
Wow. That's a very direct statement from someone in that position.
It goes even further. A Pennsylvania state legislator, Mark Cohen, formally writes to the U.S. Department of Justice's Inspector General asking them to open an independent investigation into both Luna's death and Ray's disappearance together. In his letter, he actually writes that it would be disingenuous and ultimately dangerous to our society to dismiss the possibility that violent criminals, threatened by those two men's work, could have separately targeted them both.
Did anything happen with that or come from that?
Nope, the DOJ declines. They say Luna's case is still an open FBI matter. That one crossed state lines. And that Ray's case falls outside their jurisdiction entirely since it doesn't involve federal employees. So they basically tell him to go talk to the FBI directly.
So that just kind of dies there bureaucratically.
Yeah, it does. There's also a private investigator, his name is Ed Martino, who'd been looking into the Luna case separately, and he floats his own theory that the connection isn't specific people, but the East Coast heroin trade itself. A writer named William Kesling, who wrote a book on the Luna case, put it a little differently. He argued it's less about one specific gang and more about a shared mindset among high-level drug dealers who, in his words, stop at nothing for drug profits.
Okay, so even the people pushing this theory admit it's more of a pattern than like a proven link, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And officially, law enforcement in both cases have always maintained there's no established connection between the two men's work and what happened to them. They say the connection people draw is more about pattern than proof. So two prosecutors, both working heroin cases, both meeting some kind of terrible fate, all within a year and a half of each other.
Okay, but if I'm ranking theories at this point, Sandusky with basically zero actual evidence versus this heroin thing, I mean, you've got real people in law enforcement raising concerns. The heroin angle feels like it should be getting way more attention.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's one of the most underrated threads in this entire case. It honestly gets a fraction of the media coverage that Sandusky does. And, probably because Sandusky is a much bigger, more recognizable name. But evidence wise, this heroin case, that feels like the stronger theory.
Absolutely. Where does all of this leave us today? Is the case just cold and unsolved at this time?
Yeah, as of right now, unsolved, cold. One more thing from Bob. He stayed one of the loudest, most consistent voices on this case for the rest of his life. He never let it go. And in 2021, shortly before he passed away at 69, he made one of his most specific claims yet. He said a prison inmate had actually written to him directly, claiming that his own cellmate, someone Ray had personally prosecuted and sent to prison years earlier, was involved in Ray's disappearance. According to the inmate, his cellmate had told him that Ray had, quote, ran afoul of a person who was in the witness protection program. Bob said investigators had only ever done a cursory interview with that inmate and never followed up further. And at least publicly, nothing has come of it, but it feels like one more thread that never fully got pulled on. Bob's entire argument all the way to the end always came back to one core idea, that as a prosecutor, Ray had made real enemies over 35 years, and that risk doesn't just vanish because someone's about to retire. He put it simply, district attorneys have real enemies in people that want to harm us. It goes with the territory. Up until Bob passed in 2021, he was still convinced his friend was the victim of something far worse than an accident, and still without an answer. In 2010, the DA at the time, Stacey Parks Miller, puts together a whole cold case review board to take a fresh look. She said, and this was at the 5-year mark, the case has not gone cold, and that investigators have chased every lead, even far-fetched ones. And interestingly, she goes on record saying she personally believes the homicide is the least likely explanation of the three.
Wait, really? After everything we just talked about?
Yeah. I mean, she's just one voice, but it shows you that literally every person close to this case walks away with some different gut read on it.
Okay, so if she thinks homicide is the least likely of the three, what does that leave? I mean, we've talked a lot about murder in this episode with Sandusky and the heroin angle. I guess there's a suicide theory. I don't know. Just the other theory is that he's just gone,
Yeah.
up and left.
Yep. Those are the three. Let's talk about the suicide theory for a second. I don't know if we've given it its full due. And there's a piece of it that I think maybe people tend to miss.
Okay, what do you think that is?
So the obvious pushback to the suicide theory has been life seemed good, no depression diagnosis, he was happy, he was looking forward to retiring. And all of that's true. But here's the thing that I think matters more than people give it credit for. If Ray did go into the Susquehanna River on purpose, there's a real chance that he's just never found at all, ever.
And why is that? Is this river pretty big?
Yeah. This river wasn't, slow moving or shallow. It's a real moving river system. It eventually connects into the main Susquehanna and flows all the way down into the Chesapeake Bay. A body that goes in near Lewisburg doesn't necessarily stay near Lewisburg, especially if there's high water or flooding in the weeks after, which, remember, This is springtime in Pennsylvania. That was what was going on.
Okay, so even a massive search of that one stretch wouldn't necessarily find him if he'd already moved somewhere else entirely.
Right, exactly.
But also, that to me leads more to the homicide theory, too, along with all of this. Someone could put him in there and assume he wouldn't be found
Yeah,
with his laptop and the hard drive, you know?
right. And that's why it's like, okay, did all three go in the water at the same time? We found the two. Why did we find the two but not him? Or then this connects to the homicide theory more. Were those two things put in there after?
Yeah.
Because there are.
Which absolutely, they could have looked at what they wanted to, they could have thrown him in, looked at whatever they wanted to on the laptop, thrown those in,
Yep.
you know?
After the fact, whatever the case may be, maybe when it wasn't at its peak and dealing with runoff and melting and everything like that.
Right.
There's a few other things working against recovery too while we're on it. Rivers are full of submerged debris like fallen trees, old bridge structures, rocks. A body can get physically snagged underwater and just never resurface, which is horrible. Normally, decomp creates gas that makes a body float back up eventually, but if it's trapped before that happens, it can decompose all the way down to skeletal remains while it's still underwater. And at that point, scattered remains on a riverbed are incredibly easy to miss, especially over the span of years.
Yeah, that's genuinely unsettling to think about. That he could be essentially right there and just never found.
Yeah, agreed. And this actually lines up with his brother's case in an interesting way. We know Roy's body was recovered from the Great Miami River within about a week. So if you're leaning on the history runs in families argument for the suicide theory, you also have to reckon with the fact that Roy's case had a resolution and Ray's doesn't, which either argues against the parallel entirely or it just means Ray's case is one of the unlucky ones where the river simply never gave him back.
So it's not actually a contradiction to the suicide theory that he was never found. Could just be bad luck geographically.
Yeah, right. I agree. There's a lot of discourse with this case that treats no body as proof that something more sinister happened, kidnapping, murder, a cover up. But the truth is, rivers lose people permanently. And horrifyingly, it happens more than you'd think. And it doesn't require anyone else to be involved at all.
Such a different way to think about it than everything else we've covered tonight, really.
Yeah, it is. And it's part of why this case is so maddening. Every single theory, suicide, homicide, voluntary disappearance, has just enough going for it that nobody can rule anything out, and just enough missing that nobody can prove what it was either. One theory investigators mentioned is Europe, specifically Slovenia, where Roy reportedly had relatives. This wasn't, speculation from people in the area of where he might run. Police took it seriously enough to act on it. Investigators enlisted the help of Interpol to circulate flyers with his photo throughout Slovenia in case he made his way there. Nothing ever came of this either. No sighting, no report, no confirmed contact. But it's just a small window into how far this investigation actually reached. This isn't just a guy who disappeared from a small Pennsylvania county. Police were putting his face in front of international law enforcement on a whole other continent, just in case. In July of 2011, Ray's daughter, Lara, petitions the court to have him declared legally dead, and the judge grants it.
Must have been such a hard thing to do.
I think so too.
Because you want to hold on to that hope that he'll come back or he'll be found or something.
Yeah. Having to make that decision would be so hard.
Yeah. You don't want to have him be out there and see that you gave up hope, or, just to have those thoughts and then have to go do that. That would be really hard.
Even though no one's thinking that it means you gave up hope, I still feel like you would probably have
Right.
that internal dialogue, like you said.
Yeah.
There's a strange little detail. The attorney representing his ex-wife in that filing is a man named Amos Goodall. I don't know if you remember that. That was the man that Ray beat decades earlier in the 1985 election for district attorney.
Oh, that's a weird full circle moment here.
Right? Now, we're talking 21 years later. This case is still technically open. Pennsylvania State Police say so on the record as recently as this year. There's still a standing $5,000 reward that keeps getting reissued. No one has ever collected his final salary, and no one has ever claimed his pension.
That's such a sad detail of the whole thing to me. Like, there's just money sitting there waiting for a man who's never coming back for it.
Yeah, agreed.
It's sad that they can't pass his pension on to his daughter.
I agree. You would think after he's been declared legally dead, they would do that.
Right. I was thinking that too. I wonder if he didn't have it set up like I don't even know. Can you do that for a pension, like a beneficiary?
I
Beneficiary?
don't know either. I don't know. You would think there would
Seems
be
like
something.
there would be.
Maybe,
I would think so.
maybe hopefully he had life insurance, though, that was able to be collected if the pension and the salary weren't.
Yeah, maybe.
I want to leave you with one last quote from Dwayne Dixon. He was that Belafonte police chief back when all of this started, now retired, actually living here in Arizona. Years later, reflecting on the case, he said, "Just about any time someone finds a body, it makes me think about Ray. I always wonder if it's him." He also said something that stuck with me since I read it, that just about anyone who follows the case has their own theory. And he can't ever fully turn down a media request because there's always a chance that a news article reaches someone with new information.
Yeah, it's such a heavy thing to carry for someone who's worked this case that long.
Yeah, agreed. It really is. Well, and that's where we leave it because that's genuinely where this case still sits. No body, no answers, a lot of theories, but a man who went for a drive on a warm April afternoon and never came home.
So crazy. And I mean, just no answers. It's so
Yeah.
wild to me that someone can just disappear like that. And I know we've talked
Agreed.
about it with other cases too. It's like, where are they?
Yeah.
I feel like he has to be in the river somehow and washed away to some place that they weren't able to find him, either voluntarily or involuntarily.
Even with that part of it, you still don't know how he ended up in the water definitively, right?
Yeah.
Still leads to more questions.
Yeah. I definitely think the cigarette ash in his car is an odd detail.
Agreed. We have 2 fingerprints.
2 fingerprints that aren't identified.
And, the thing I think with the phone, did they think if someone did this to Ray, did they think leaving the phone in the car would make it so there were no pings to give away where he went or, nothing like that?
Maybe. But I mean, you throw the laptop and the hard drive in the river. Why don't you throw the phone too?
I know.
When she was calling, it was going straight to voicemail.
Which is another thing that I've been wondering about. Did he turn it off? If so, why?
I don't know. I mean,
that's why the phone thing doesn't really make sense to me either.
Yeah. I don't understand why, unless he did jump into the river voluntarily to complete suicide, got rid of his laptop, separated that to get rid of something, some kind of evidence. But we always talk about, when they're excited about the future, they're planning for the future.
I know. That's such a tricky thing with cases where that is a possibility.
Yeah. Very interesting case.
Yeah. I wish that it weren't unsolved. I wish I could give you a better ending than that.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
My goodness. Come on.
It is a really interesting one. There is a ton out there on it. So we'll link to a big long list of resources. And that link is always in our show notes if you want to read more about this one. It is very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, we would be so grateful if you would give us a rating or a review or subscribe to our YouTube. Those mean the world to us. And like I said, we'll link in the show notes, or you can find it on our website, crimeclueless.com. We always do a write-up on every episode we cover, as well as listing all of the resources so that you can read them or you can see what we used to create the episode. We would love if you would follow us on Instagram or Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. We're at Crime Clueless on all of those.
Yes, come find us.
All right. And as always, remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murders.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.